Good morning, good evening. Whoever you are, wherever you are, whatever you might be doing, we wish to welcome you to the Silverlight Show. The silverlight shines to illuminate that which lies hidden in darkness. For those of you listening in on the Life Online Radio Network, we welcome you in. For those of you listening to us on our YouTube channel, we welcome you in. The Government of Ontario has recently said that Halloween will not be allowed in the Greater Toronto Area. And basically the government has decided to edit out Halloween as though the holiday didn't exist. Poof, it's not there anymore. You'll be allowed to celebrate in the privacy of your own homes, just not in the street. Because the government can choose to edit what is allowed and what isn't, we'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor, Affinity Writing and Editing Services. That's at Affinity WES on Facebook or Twitter, at Affinity WES. Whatever you write, they're there to help. But it's in the spirit of Halloween being zapped out of existence that this show is dedicated to things that go bump in the night. And we've all had that one experience that really freaks us out. Tell you the truth, it was about a month ago when I was recording this show. And my significant other and our child, both of them were upstairs asleep. And the house was dead quiet. And I used my basement as a sound studio because it doesn't bother them. And strangely, upstairs, I could hear the sliding door creak open. And I was really freaked out at the time because I can hear them. It's one unified stairwell like in most houses, and nobody had come downstairs. And I was recording the show, and I think if you listen to my voice, I did get a little bit anxious. And then finally, in the distance, you can hear a cat go meow. My little black cat had decided my life was not stressful enough, so he decided to become the thing that went bump in the night. So this very show owes its existence in part to that one incident. There's a lot of other things that have terrorized humans throughout history. We went through ghosts a bit ago, and I wish to focus on poltergeists. Noisy ghosts, as they're known in German. It's a peculiar phenomenon. It's not at all like the movie of the Poltergeist. That was an excellent special effects show. I enjoyed the sequel more than the original. I don't know whether it was dumbed down to my tastes or whether they did something else. I just kind of liked that sinister preacher and all the crazy things going on. Just personal taste, though. The original's a classic. I would never have a problem with anybody saying the original is better. Movies aside, this is not a show about movies. This is a show about the alternative side of real life, the B track, as some people used to call it. And poltergeist activity is something I'm very familiar with. There's all sorts of cases of it. Again, in movies and TV shows, you'll see a candlestick hovering down a hallway, or you'll see a glass move from one place to another. There have been many studies done on psychokinetic phenomena over the years that result in poltergeist activity. And the one not universal, but a consistent presence in most of these cases is that of a teenager right around the age of puberty. Something seems to happen that either taps into energies that are already there or emanates from that teenager and causes things to go bump in the night. Whether it's simply your cell phone falls off the table when nobody was near it, or you do witness your potted plant go from one side of the house to the other, it's definitely there on the scale. I have seen very strange things happen. We all have. If you put something down secure and it moves off the table, this is something that would very, very easily slot into the potential real world of our real world. There's so many possibilities that it's really difficult to nail down precisely what poltergeist and psychokinetic activity could be. Most of us live in an urban environment, in a city, somewhere that is pulsating with vibrations. Not only sound vibrations, but electromagnetic vibrations, tons of things that can move anything, anywhere at a moment's notice. Just because you can't hear it and you can't feel it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And for experimentation's sake sometime, just put out a glass of water, something that you can see the vibrations in, and turn on a radio. And you're going to have an interesting experience watching the sound waves move about in your glass. And that, there's nothing paranormal about that, but it shows you how vibrations work. The floor in here is actually cushioned, and yet I'm a meter away from my water bottle, and I can still make it shake just by the sound of my voice. And I don't think I'm shouting at the present time. Actually, I know I'm not shouting. You'll never hear me shout on this show. That's reserved for people that annoy me. The problem is, because there's so many phenomena that go on that are quite scientific, just a mash of electromagnetic frequencies, sound waves, vibrations, and all the devices that we depend on, we can't really nail down what poltergeists are, and it will be very difficult to do it in the future. Unless we can find some beautifully undisturbed cave that's beneath the surface of the earth, that's totally cut off from all communications, it would be really hard to rule out every single possibility. But you never know what the future holds. We're already getting very good at compiling data and information in a database and getting computers to sort it out, so with the right funding, maybe it will be possible. Well, with the right person, because it's a matter of insight and a matter of money. You have to have the person who's smart enough to write the 2 million lines of code or whatever it's going to take to sort one series out from another, and someone wants to get paid for their time, so you have to have the funding in there. There's always money behind everything we do in this world, sadly, my friends. Poltergeists, I would qualify as being a kind of ghost because there's not always a pubescent teenager around when weird stuff happens. And there is a link between it and other paranormal activity. So that brings us back to the realm of ghosts. I've made it clear before, I'm not really a fan of ghost hunters, UFO hunters, whatever hunters that may be out there, but at the same token, the shows have done a big service in bringing the eyes of the world to the paranormal experience. Without those shows, before those shows took place, there was the X-Files, and people could easily write that off as fiction. But when these people started going into the fields and getting strange lights on their cameras and temperature changes and all the other things that they point to as signs of paranormal activity, it really did change the world for everybody around us. Even if you didn't watch any of them, you probably saw footage, whether it be on YouTube, whether a friend showed it to you, whether you happened to be at a bar and they were playing it. I've seen bars play lots of crazy stuff on their televisions. But the fact is, it is more in the public conscious now. And the fact is, it's being drummed into our consciousness. Ghosts exist. Poltergeists exist. Witches exists. Yes, witches. And I'm not just talking the Salem witch trials witch. I'm talking modern day witches. These are not a phenomenon. These are 100% real. You can probably go on Facebook and look a few of them up. You can go on Google. You can find their doctrines. And really, it's people not only trying to reinvoke the ancient ways, but also to find meaning for themselves. The Bible does say not to consort with witches or necromancers, but at the same token, I believe modern day witches are pretty far away from necromancy, and they don't really raise the dead, which was the singular thing that was prohibited in the ancient Israelite religion and up to the present day. Modern witches, they'll cast spells, they'll use sour jars, they'll use sweet oils, and it's really an effect of trying to use mind over matter. If you listen to the motivational speakers of the 50s and 60s where they were telling you you can do anything if you put your mind to it, that's kind of the exact same strategy that witches take. If you put your mind to something, you can make change happen in the world. And they view change as neutral. The reason is the change itself is neither positive or negative. Your intention is. So if you're bitter at your ex-lover because they broke up with you for whatever bad reason, and you put a curse on them, the curse itself is not evil, but your intention is. And at the same token, if you put a blessing on that person, your intention is what is good, not the magic itself. Now, the witches themselves have gotten a pretty good base in the internet culture. The old idea of covens and, group of 3 witches meeting over a bubbling cauldron and dropping an eye of newt and other crazy shenanigans has really gone to the bygone age. Besides masonry, I would say witches are about the most exposed group out there because they've put everything they know online, keeping it safe for future generations. So witches, definitely out there. Whether they can actually turn you into a toad, not entirely convinced of that. But here's an interesting little historical fact. Did you know that a lot of the things that were preserved as witches' books, recipes that had your eye of newt, feet of a toad, dragons, feather, stuff like that, those were actually secret cookbooks. A lot of them. Not all of them. There are real grimoires out there, such as the Lesser Key of Solomon. But some chefs wanted to keep their recipe secret, used witches' terminology, shall we call it, just to keep their ingredients safe. So it would kind of be like Chef Ramsay not telling you were getting a filet mignon, but he would be saying, oh, this luscious rack of calves tongue or whatever it might be. No, calf tongue is actually a delicacy that some people like. But you get the idea of what I'm saying. It's a very different thing than the witchcraft, the way it was perceived in the Middle Ages, where the hag down the road, and I use the hag not in an insultive term, but as a descriptive term, but her evil eye could curse you. The evil eye is yet another thing that goes bump in the night. To this very day, people all around the world have superstitions against the evil eye. The idea that you didn't necessarily need to be a witch and have an incantation or a potion to cause distress to someone, you could just curse them with the evil eye. And there's a lot of really interesting stories on this. There was one woman who survived the Titanic. She survived the Olympic, and there was one other sinking she survived on, and she still kept on sailing on ships. Fortunately, people got the idea that when she was there, that there was a chance they would survive because she was always survived. But in other medieval times, and even in modern times, people would look at that and say, whew, that lady's cursed. Everything she steps on goes bad. And in her defense, we all know somebody like that who, for some reason, it's always raining on their parade. Everything goes the wrong way. They act with all the positive intentions in life, but for some crazy reason, it never goes their way. And yes, those curses are real. They do exist. Motivational speakers would have you believe they have the wrong mindset, but I know a few of these people, and they're as happy as they could be. At least that's what they project. And all we can really judge people by is what they tell us, what they project, and what they do. And these star-crossed people, I'll call them, who just seem to have been born on the wrong side of the womb, unfortunately, they just get bad breaks in life. We all know somebody like that. Perhaps some of you out there are those people. And if so, Hearts going out to you, my friends. We're all in this together, and I hope if life eases up just a little on you in this rather cursed year that we're having, that's one good thing that we can have. Now, witches, as I said before, are believed to cast curses on you. And I think there's a pretty good scientific explanation for this. It's a scientific explanation that's kind of used as a catch-all, but follow me along on this. You have to see where I'm going. There's something that's called sleep paralysis. And it's estimated that almost everybody goes through it during their life, but not everybody recognizes it for what it is. Sleep paralysis, medically and from my own experience, is when you go to sleep or you're about to sleep and suddenly you find you're locked inside your body. Your brain is thinking, but you cannot move. You're straining with all your might, and maybe you can flicker a finger or something like that, and then suddenly your body pops back to life. It's terrifying. For myself and to everybody suffering from it, it is no joke, and my heart goes out to all of you. Sleep paralysis is one of the biggest unfortunate things of being human. The creepy thing about it is those of us who've experienced it time and time again kind of know when it's coming on. So we can try to wake ourselves up a little and spare ourselves the worst of it, or take whatever precautions we need to do. For me, it's usually just a matter if I can move my head, I'm fine. Some people say if you use sleep paralysis, you can roll out of your body and start astral traveling. That sounds fantastic. I've never trained to do that. So if you're in that situation, maybe you can give it a shot. I'm not that enlightened, unfortunately. Sleep paralysis is also invoked to explain a lot of phenomena, like a witch's curse. If a witch cursed you and you had sleep paralysis that day, you would feel like you had been poisoned. Especially if you had a glass of wine or something, you would just feel terrible and you'd be saying, oh, that old witch cursed me. Sleep paralysis is also invoked to explain spirits and specters and things that go bump in the night. This is partially true, but I've experienced both shadow people and sleep paralysis. And there's a big difference between the two in my experience. Sleep paralysis is something I can depend to happen to me probably 2 to 3 times a month. It happens, I go on with my life, everything is good. I have seen shadow people. Now what shadow people are they're people like us, except their bodies are made of pure shadow. And there's a feeling that goes along with them, a feeling of dread, a feeling of they're there to do something harmful to you. That whole primal nature of your brain is opened up and it's shaking in fear. And I can tell you, that is not sleep paralysis. Normally during my sleep paralysis, I find it difficult to breathe, so I'm trying to move to be able to breathe. When the shadow person appeared, I could breathe just fine. I couldn't move. And this is something that a lot of people encounter. They're not able to move, and they can sense and or see this thing in the corner. There have been a couple paintings of this done throughout the ages, particularly the 18th century, and it's seen as an almost alien-looking creature standing on your chest as if to push the air out of you. Definitely not something I would wish on anybody. But as I said, there are two different sensations. Sleep paralysis, can't breathe, can't move, but eventually you shake out of it. The shadow person, you can't move, you can breathe, and there is something there. If it occurred more regularly, which I hope it doesn't, then I'd be able to tell you more about it. But right now, I'm very happy the two sensations are distinct in my mind, in my existence, and don't cross over. Now, as far as ghosts go, I can understand that. In that state, the sleep paralysis state, yes, it is frightening. And you could interpret something the wrong way. Once upon a time, I used to have a knife by my bed for protection. I no longer have this. It's silly. And what I found is when I experienced sleep paralysis, that knife would go missing and my glasses would go missing. I could usually find my glasses, but I couldn't find my knife. And my knife would go missing for a week or two, and then I'd find it somewhere out in the open. Now, it's possible that I moved it while I was sleeping, because obviously my glasses got moved, and I do have cats. But my cats don't show much interest in that stuff. And I've been sleepwalking, I've done everything in my life, and I've never touched my glasses or anything else. So it doesn't seem like that the two are directly related. They're indirectly related. Somehow my glasses get moved, somehow the knife got moved, and somehow I became affected with sleep paralysis. It's one of those unknowns of life that we'll figure out one day. Going back to vibrations, though, which I think works with sleep paralysis, there's a frequency that has been determined scientifically to make you feel like there's something paranormal happening. It's 19 hertz. You start hearing at 20 hertz. A lot of your body resonates at 19 hertz, so 19,000 cycles per minute. Your eyes resonate on that. And if they put you in a room where they only play 19 hertz noises, people do start hallucinating. They start feeling like somebody's watching over their shoulder. They start feeling like there's something amiss, something is going to happen. And they do start seeing things. There's a lot of possibilities with this, but when something matches a frequency, so again, 19 hertz, your eyes are vibrating at 19 hertz, and let's pretend for a second that the sound outside, for some reason, is modulated to go at 19 hertz. The two come together and they resonate with each other. They form harmony. Now, harmony means they're both vibrating at the same time, the same cycle. It's like two heartbeats synchronizing to each other. And this is where I think a lot of supernatural phenomena might be happening. Let me clarify what I mean exactly. I'm not saying that supernatural phenomena, ghosts, poltergeists, sleep paralysis, are all illusions or fantastic stuff. I'm just saying that when you get a harmonization effect, like 19 megahertz lining up with your eyes and with sleep paralysis, maybe it's possible that our consciousness also takes that same jump. After all, we're not only just spirits living inside flesh, which is mostly true, but the flesh also does influence the spirit. What we see does really influence a lot of what we think. And if our eyes, which are a huge part of our sensory input, are hijacked by this 19 hertz frequency, maybe it is possible, just maybe, not only to see something supernatural, but perhaps just like an infrared light, we're going to be seeing something that's just outside of our vision that normally wouldn't be there. Perhaps it's peeking in from another dimension, in the case of the shadow beings. Perhaps it's peeking in from a layer we don't even understand. Whether it's the voices of people that we've loved and lost, or a Roman cavalry, Roman centurion appearing in the middle of our living room, which I'm sure is one of the phenomena that has happened within the 20th century. No matter what, we are seeing something that shouldn't be there. And our senses, through sleep paralysis and through the frequency of our eyes, have been hijacked. This is also possible without the sleep paralysis. People who have seizures frequently report hallucinations. Now, they realize those hallucinations are not there. However, I've talked to a few people with honest-to-goodness, non-drug-induced hallucinations, And they are able to describe them in minute detail, just incredible detail, down to anything you wish to name. I was with an elderly person, and I didn't know it. They were toward the end of their time. They were a matter of days. And we were sitting in the hospital. And they described to me this most beautiful scene. They were telling me how outside they could see the children playing, and they described the wind and the colors of the kids and how the grass was green, all this wonderful stuff. And I looked out the window and I saw bricks. And I would have loved to have seen whatever it was that person was seeing, because it was definitely more pleasant than what I was looking at. I call that a positive hallucination. Now, the body does produce its own drugs to calm pain, to calm yourself down. There's all sorts of chemicals your brain is always awash in. And it's quite possible that towards the end of your life, the brain recognizes that it's going down, and it starts to release endorphins and dopamines and all sorts of stuff into your mind. Because after all, what does it have to lose? At the same token, those hormones generally just give you a feeling of a good feeling. So I think that when people do see hallucinations like that, where it's not just, hey, there's a yellow elephant over there, man. No, that's a different hallucination. That's caused by the type of drugs your brain does not produce naturally. But when they're able to sit there and tell you this whole scene, that I think is somebody looking into a much nicer environment, and something we should really pay a lot more attention to. Back to things that go bump in the night, though. That was just my little ham-fisted attempt at an explanation. We'll go on to some more entertaining stuff after this. For those of you worldwide, I don't know if you're familiar with what a Wendigo is. In the northern United States and through a lot of Canada, there's a being that evokes more fear than anything else in the world. It's stronger than a werewolf. It's scarier than a vampire. It's called the Wendigo. A Wendigo is the spirit of a person who basically gave in to their hunger in the woods and participated in cannibalism. So, after indulging in cannibalism, the person starts to waste away because the spirits of the forest are changing them into their monstrous nature. A Wendigo is apparently a very powerful shaman, and they're able to summon up snowstorms out of midair. They're able to appear and follow you around, and it's rumored that they can even stalk you to the end of your days. There were people at the beginning of the century that would go around killing other people, claiming they were becoming Wendigos, and the courts let them away with it. Not because of any superstitious mumbo-jumbo, but rather because the courts were convinced that these men were absolutely certain what they were doing was a service for society. It's kind of like an insanity defense, but not quite, because they were let go. An insanity defense will only get you put into the loony bin. Don't have any idea that you can plead insanity and get away from a crime. No. You go into the loony bin, and you go into the special loony bin where nobody listens to you. Don't ask me how I know that. The fact, though, is that Wendigos are incredibly powerful, but outside of a few tight circles, they're really not known outside of Aboriginal tribes. We call them First Nations up here in Canada. They call them Native Americans south of the border. And they're an astonishingly powerful creature. They don't have the romance or the Hollywood glitz, I will call it, of your Frankenstein's monster, your Dracula, your Wolfman, the traditional baddies. But I think they really do deserve a spot in the top 10 list, just because of their sheer power and the sheer terror that they invoke. After all, this is a cannibal Hannibal Lecter-style person who suddenly now has mystical powers and can control the weather itself. And apparently the older they get, the more powerful they get. Definitely a match for old Dracula, no matter what tricks he might have up his sleeve. Speaking of werewolves, there's another thing that goes thump in the night. We've all been there, lying half asleep, and all of a sudden some dog, for some crazy reason, lets loose with a howl. Yep, it's happened to every single person on the planet because there's dogs everywhere on the planet. Dogs and humans go hand in hand. To a person that isn't in quite as advanced a society as we are, somebody living close to a forest where wolves are around, they would have heard very different cries. And indeed, outside their window, they might have even heard scratches at the door, because that was the wolves looking to get in. In the northern countries of Scandinavia, there was also a tradition where a man could wear the skin of an animal and turn into it. The First Nations have something similar to it. I'm sure the Asian communities have something similar where if you wear the skin of an animal, you become that animal. So we have this tradition of you are what you wear that's universal across the human species. Probably this came from shamanic rituals. By that I mean shamans are known to wear hairy cloaks. And everywhere you go, there's some sort of a tradition where people dress up, just like on Halloween, and try to either become the spirit, like they do in the voodoo ceremonies, where you become Beren Samedi or one of his people, or like the Norse do, you become the wolf, you become the bear, and thus half wolf, half man, half devil, half man, whatever it might be. You're giving away part of your humanity to gain the powers of whatever costume you're putting on. For those of you that get to celebrate Halloween this year, think about that. The tradition that goes back is that you are gaining the powers of the form that you are assuming. So in the past, you would get people dressed up as ghosts, as witches and stuff like that. And now you're getting Powerpuff Girls and Power Rangers and Paw Patrol, and I think that's all the P costumes I can think of. But you're trying to become part of them. We have another name for this in our modern culture, which is furries. Furries like to put on their costumes and pretend that they are merged with whatever creature that they choose to identify with. Now, I'm not condemning anybody for any of this. It's not my place to condemn. It's my place to inform. The fact is, this goes back so far into human history that we even have cave paintings of it. And they still haven't determined the age of those, but they go back at least to the last ice age, possibly earlier. And it also makes sense to do it. You might think it's madness, but that's simply 21st century postmodern human talking. If you get bit by a wolf, God forbid, but if you don't have access to penicillin, to aspirin and everything else, if you put on its pelt, then you're taking on its powers and you're able to use your mind to make that pain go away. There's the old expression, hair of the dog, which means having a drink of what you had the night before in order to make the hangover today go away. It, again, reflects that old tradition of you getting the hair of the dog that bit you. If you can pull its hair out, you can then mix it into a concoction and the bite will heal up much sooner. I would love to dismiss this as just superstition, but it's hard to do when naturopaths and, oh my goodness, I can't remember the name of it at the moment. Not naturopaths, but those people that dilute things 10 million times and give you that little tiny vial. That's a pity I can't think of the word for them at the moment. But anyways, that's something that they subscribe to, that a tiny bit of the poison that's going to kill you is going to cure you. And indeed, this has taken root in popular culture. In The Princess Bride, Wesley reveals that the reason he wasn't killed by the iocane poison is because he'd been exposing himself to it in small doses for the past year. Now, this may be true of certain things. People with peanut allergies, right now there is a very good experimental therapy going on where they really give you a super diluted amount of peanut, and after a full year you're able to eat a full peanut. So it's scientific, it works, but it takes very dedicated control and practice. At the same token, I don't think taking hair from a dog that bit you is going to do any good for you, nor is drinking what you did last night, because you're just getting drunk again and postponing the hangover for later. So werewolves taking on the spirit of the animal that you profess that you want to be? I'm going to say maybe. And you might be surprised why I say maybe. The reason I say that is because all ideas come from our psyche, our subconscious. And I think this idea is so deeply ingrained in our subconscious, and shamanism and tribalism being what they are, I see it being valid. Again, voodoo ceremonies are the modern equivalent where you take on the form of the spirit that you are wearing the robes of. The Vikings were able to carry out huge raids with their berserkers, bare skin, berserker, and that was all done because they thought when they put on that skin, they were taking on the characteristics of the animal that it got. So imagine having the power of a bear. Imagine having the power of a wolf. For furries, imagine if you could be a cute little puppy for a day. That's a lot nicer than a lot of people get in the modern world. So no judgment on furries, no judgment on werewolves. I'm just going to sit back and say, hey, be what you are, do what you're going to do. Which brings us to what should be the final thing that goes bump in the night. The big V, vampires. And no, we're not talking ones that sparkle in the sunlight. Vampires have really been given a disservice over the past 30 years. I think Anne Rice is a decent author. I thought the movies that they made from her books were interesting, but it really took away from the core essence of a vampire. It took him out of Dracula's sinister stalking his victim, and all of a sudden made them into these love objects. Vampires are many things, but they are not love objects. Vampires. Again, the whole world has some sort of tradition of a blood-sucking or worse creature that goes around. Then you can probably throw incubi and succubi into the mix. Incubi and succubi suck your vital fluids, whether you're male or female, and use them for their own rituals. Believe me, the legend gets a lot more graphic than that, but let's just leave it to that. Vampires. This is one of the reasons when I wrote my book, Blood, I kind of pulled the vampire back a bit because I didn't want him wearing frilly shirts and I didn't want him having women faint at the sight of him out of love and lust. No, that's not what a vampire is. A vampire is a recently deceased or more deceased, depending on how old the vampire is, that goes around sucking blood and killing people. In the past, people would get the wasting sickness, and they would think that there was a vampire foot that was draining the life out of them. And of course, as the Bible says, the life is in the blood. So they would go around looking for any interred corpses that were recent, dig them up, and if any hadn't decomposed in exactly the way they expected, they would chop them up, stick a stake in them, and say that was the vampire. The only problem with this is No two corpses really decompose at the same rate. There's actually a big study going on right now to try to determine exactly that, exactly how quickly corpses decompose in a given situation. It's still in its very early stages, but this is something that for all of humanity, despite all the medical grants and all the medical research, has been completely ignored. Which, when you think about World War II, is surprising nobody did this study. I'm not saying any particular sides here, but it wasn't the Allies that were likely to do it. Going back to vampires, a vampire is not sexy, not in the least. It's a corpse. At its best, it'll be recently deceased. It will have minimal putrefaction, and I use that word because do you know what loves corpses? Bugs. And bugs know a good meal. If you're in a house, drop a breadcrumb on the floor, wait, and chances are a bug is going to come in there. Despite that our 21st century titanium-lined coffins with 1,000-year guarantees, which I don't understand for the life of me, bugs are eventually going to get in. Let me just go back to that for a second. I don't get these titanium-laden coffins. Like, we're flesh, we're blood. You're going to spend all this money on a coffin for what? Think about that. That's $50,000 to $100,000 or more. I haven't priced at a funeral lately, so if my prices are off, I apologize. And they're probably way on the low side. But I mean, what's going to happen? So they throw your flesh bag, and I use that term because it's not your spirit in there, it's just your bag of flesh. And it sits there and it rots in a slightly nicer environment than the one next to it. That's a waste of money. But I'm not one to criticize the way people spend their money. It's just why literally throw it in the ground. You are burying good money at that point. Good time, good effort, and that same money could help out charities. It could establish a foundation in your name. I'm getting off track though. I recognize that undertakers have a job to do and they need to make money too. I respect them. They have a very difficult job. But please, if you're going to spend your money on something, don't make it a coffin. Make it something that really will make people remember you. Vampires get remembered by the number of victims they have. And Dracula, I'm sure as everybody knows, comes from Vlad Dracul, a prince of Wallachia, which is in the region of Transylvania, and he was a very interesting man. While he has never directly been confirmed to be a vampire, outside of Bram Stoker's story, Vlad Dracul, when he was a child, was held prisoner by the Turks. It was, in those days, to show that you were going to comply with a peace treaty, you would give hostages. So you would send your son to live with a neighbor you had a peace treaty with so that if you broke the treaty, they would be able to kill your son. It was an effective way of doing it. Another way would be to marry into the family. But at that point, Turks and Christians were too far divided to even consider a marriage. So Vlad Dracul grew up surrounded by death. Because the Turks, not all of them were evil, but at the same token, the Turks on the front line had to maintain their discipline and they had to maintain the terror that the Christians had. So they would frequently, there's no polite way to say this, they would roast people on a stick, quite literally. They would take a pole, insert it through the rectum, out through the mouth, and hang it in the sky. This was called impalement. And Vlad became famous when he came back and took over his own princedom of Wallachia. He was notorious for having banquets while all these people hung in the air. And yeah, it's just, despite the fact he was not a very nice person, he was one of the men defending Christianity at the time from the Muslim world. and the Muslim people were justifiably terrified of him, even though they had taught him their methods. Vlad Dracul was eventually tricked and off the throne and assassinated, as happens to everybody that was in that area at that time. Basically, if you want unlimited power, have a good bodyguard, because someone's going to be gunning for you. Over time, though, the myth of his existence was heard by Bram Stoker, who turned it into the novel Dracula, based off some other stuff he knew about vampires. Now, vampires, the world over, suck your life energy. Some of them appear to be very attractive, some of them appear to be very, very innocuous, but they all are there for one thing. They want your life energy to perpetuate their own. And this is where we come back to the corpse. Vlad Dracul, of course, has long since been a corpse. If Vlad Dracul was a vampire and was around today, there's no way he would be wearing frilly shirts and sparkling. No. This is a man who has spent nearly 500 years rotting at one stage or another. Even if he was able to access fresh corpses every time, well, fresh life every time he wanted, he would still spend a fair bit of time rotting. So the only way a vampire would be able to appear sexy and attractive and enticing would be for them to be able to dominate your will. So a vampire's true power would be that of hypnotism. Maybe stronger, more like mesmerism than hypnotism, but the same token, first of all, they have to get you to not notice how disgusting they are. Again, in my book, Blood, this is one of the powers that the vampire has. He knows that he is a very unattractive person, but with just the right look, just the right charm, he can make you believe he is more than he is. And for anybody out there who's afraid of things that go bump in the night, remember that most of these things only have power over you because they've taken away a bit of your free will, whether through sleep paralysis, whether through manipulating the frequencies of your body, whatever it is, you are no longer completely in control of yourself. Once you see through them, just like the vampire, it's nothing more than a husk, a corpse, something that will fall over if you so much as breathe on it. And this is true of a lot of the paranormal. The paranormal is powerful over you when you allow it to have power over you. But when you're calm and in control, just like most people are who are listening to this broadcast, we're not seeing ghosts, we're not seeing goblins, we're not watching things go across the room on their own. There's no witches that are giving us the evil eye, and even if they did, how would we notice given that everyone's giving everybody the evil eye right now? Thank you very much for the pandemic. Everyone has those masks on and they all look like they're angry. But enough about the pandemic. What it basically boils down to is the old motivational speakers were right. You can control your destiny. You can control your fate. Whether you're dealing with a supernatural creature that has the ability to rile up the elements, hey, put a couple extra jackets on, light a fire, show him who's boss. Got a werewolf? No problem. Might not have the silver bullet, but they sure as heck don't like fire, and there's one thing humans are good at, that's making fires. Please do not make any fires under the directions of this show. Only light fires in safe places. Always exercise caution and discretion when using anything flammable, and make sure to clear the area of anything that can possibly catch fire. Use only in a well-ventilated area. I'm sorry I have to include disclaimers like this, but unfortunately, we live in 2020. And because I say something, somebody out there is going to say, hey, that's a great idea. 7 billion people on this planet. Unfortunately, the ones who listen are the ones who always listen to the wrong part. And back to a vampire. The only reason a vampire has power over you is because it seduces you into thinking that it does have power over you. It doesn't. Most of you are relatively strong. maybe not quite as healthy as you were at 21, but you can knock over a corpse no problem. And that's all a vampire is, just a corpse that's playing on extra lives. Yes, it entered the Contra code, up, down, left, right, BA, and then select start. For those who don't know, that gives you 30 lives. That's an old reference. But since the vampire is playing on extra lives, it can't affect your life unless you allow it to. And that, again, comes back to a vampire is not able to attack you unless you invite it into your home or unless you allow it to invite you into its. You only become vulnerable when you open yourself up. The opening yourself up part is so paramount because it's important to do it to experience new things, but it's also important not to do it around the wrong people. One of the real life things we can all relate to are energy vampires. Now, these are not something from Star Trek. These are real people like you and I. We've all met them, that person that you're around them all day and it feels like you've done 4 days worth of work and it's just because you're in their presence. We've also met the opposites, who I like to call energy angels. An energy angel, you work around them all day and it's a fun day. You've had a good time. You feel good inside. Everything's hunky-dory. Those are saintly people in my opinion. I've been lucky enough to know a few of them in my life. Most people are mundane, but the energy vampires are just there, and there's nothing against them. They seem to be happy and social people, but just they're able to drain the energy out of the room. Again, don't leave yourselves open to it. You have the power at your command. And learn to use your mind. Train your mind and your spirit. Remember what I said about when I get sleep paralysis, I get scared, but other people say that you can use it and learn to do astral travel? That's the thing. I'm afraid to try, and I'm not afraid to admit it. But that's my own weakness, my thing that goes bump in the night. Because of my fear, I might be missing on the most fantastic experience of the world. So I've given in to the vampire, and the vampire is me. I wish to thank you for joining us for this episode of the Silverlight Show. For any feedback or comments, please feel free to send an email to silverlightservices@gmail.com. That's silverlightservices@gmail.com. The next week or so, I will be announcing my next book, Frogs, so stay tuned for that announcement. I'll tell you how to get it. Thank you for listening in, and for everybody, have a fantastic day.